We were wrong about the KN-44 Hypercube. What it actually means is not quite as simple as we once thought, and we finally figured out its true intentions. For almost 10 years, people have been puzzling over the enigmatic scraps of paper found in the Giant in Black Ops 3. The KN-44 blueprint, the Hypercube, the Tesseract, the Monty blueprint, whatever you call it, this has been such a hotly contested piece of lore, and one that's incredibly obscure. Not in the sense that no one knows about it. At this point, I think it would be hard to find someone who doesn't know about it, but instead obscure in the sense that no one knows what it actually is. Some people have been theorizing it's a part of the impossible Easter egg. I'm personally not so sure, especially since we recently solved the Der Eisendrache book cipher, which matches all of Blundel's clues as being the impossible Easter egg. I would highly recommend to check that out after we're done with this one. But even regardless of what you believe there, I thought it was about time someone sat down and tried to actually explain what the blueprint itself is even depicting. And so, for the last few weeks, that's exactly what I've been doing. In doing so, I found some huge information that makes it way more complicated than meets the eye. I hope you're ready for this, and for the sake of not melting your brains, I hope you've got a physics degree, because things are going to get very complicated very quickly. And as a little addition to this intro, whilst in the course of making this video, I stumbled across something we completely missed that was hinted at over and over again in relation to this blueprint, even transcending into Black Ops 4, the Hypercube and Monty. So stay tuned for that revelation too. First off, let's get the more recent developments out of the way over the last 8 months or so. Thanks to interviews held with the developers by Glitching Queen, we know a bit more about the blueprint itself, from the perspective of the very developer who made it. We know that the KN-44 was chosen arbitrarily. Originally, an AK-47 wallby was depicted, and then the artist who made it, Daniel Cheng, was told to use a weapon from the game instead, choosing the KN-44 because of its recognizable silhouette and similar appearance to the iconic AK-47. And I suspect this was all because it was around this time where Call of Duty was switching from real weapons that they had to pay a license fee to arms manufacturers to use to made-up weapons, a trend which has continued to this day, and of course matches with the fact that it's a futuristic game, and so is using made-up weapons based on the ones we have today. We also learned from Daniel that one of the diagrams, which we will go into more detail about later, was added directly by Daniel Cheng. He was not tasked specifically, whereas the other ones were given to him by above and had to just be included in a way that looked like they belonged in the blueprint. We're not here today to discuss any hidden cipher though. I want to discuss the blueprint as a whole, and so even the likes of the wormhole that was added by Daniel himself are still important and will be discussed today. Since it was added by a Treyarch developer and made it into the game, after all, it is still canon. These games are not just the mastermind of one person. It's a painting made by hundreds of contributors and brushes. Additionally, another development was the striking similarities between the blueprint and the map from the 1981 movie Time Bandits. This film follows an unlikely group of adventurers who are implored by the godlike Supreme Being to fix holes in space-time by traveling throughout time and space. The map they follow across time was actually made by the Supreme Being, who appears physically at the end of the film, having orchestrated their journey, and appears as an elderly British man, very far from how you might imagine a stereotypical god to look. As you can immediately tell, the similarities between the plot of Time Bandits and Black Ops 3 Zombies are abundantly clear, and to further this, the aesthetics of the map from that film are incredibly similar to the KN-44 blueprint. Keep that in mind because I think it gives a bit of a clue to what its purpose is within the canon of the storyline, again ignoring any possibility of hidden secrets within. Furthermore, the Time Bandits movie is actually based on a book of the same name, and there was another movie adaptation of the book previously in 1979. But this time going by a different title, Time After Time. In this movie, the elderly British man, god of the universe who sends them on their journey, H.G. Wells, is played by Malcolm McDowell himself. So this is clearly where they got the casting idea for Dr. Monty, and appears near the end of the book/films, just as Monty appears before the final act of Black Ops 3's narrative. So, let's get the biggest piece of the whole blueprint out of the way first. The summoning key and the KN-44 Warby. Now, my personal belief has long been that this is just depicting how the Warbys work, but I thought I should go into more detail on that. Originally, that's just what I intended to do. However, in the course of making this video, as I mentioned in the intro, I stumbled upon something that we've totally missed until now. First and foremost, let's deal with the scientific diagrams around the outside, and we'll start with the easiest. This is a wormhole, and to avoid any doubt whatsoever, Daniel Cheng said this explicitly in the Glitching Queen interview.
As far as diagrams go, the one that I contributed to it was the wormhole diagram, and so I'm not sure. Yeah, it's the one that's kind of U-shaped with the funnels going in between the U, and but everything else is, I would say, game.
And that this was something he added himself. Wormholes have become a very common idea in science fiction over the last 50 years or so. But what they actually are, aside from portals from one place to another, isn't well known to a lot of people. Essentially, a wormhole is a specialized type of black hole that bridges 2 points together. Here's a very similar diagram to the one included on the blueprint that shows us why this is useful. As you can see, traveling along path A is longer than traveling through path B, the wormhole. Every time we teleport in zombies, we are effectively using a wormhole. You can actually visualize this yourself if you feel like a little experiment whilst you watch this video. Take a piece of paper, draw a dot on one end and another dot at the other end, and draw a line between them. You can see the line is quite long. Now, fold the paper and punch a hole through both of the dots. You can see this is a far shorter path. But obviously, the paper, or space-time in this example, isn't naturally folded over like that. So something unusual has to happen in order to allow for that hole to be punched through. Using the ether, we have the medium outside the universe that allows us to connect two different points in space-time. Often, this needs a lot of electrical power, and a large amount of element 115 as its power source. And while we are never given an exact explanation on how teleportation works in the ether storyline, we can assume that element 115, as it is the very fabric of existence, allows for the punching through of these holes in reality that allow for instantaneous teleportation. The issue is, as Monty explains in Revelations, every single instance of this breaks the universe more and more. Imagine you taking your piece of paper again and start randomly folding and punching holes through. Eventually, the piece of paper is going to be totally ruined. And if you carry on even past that, the entire piece of paper will eventually just disintegrate. When you put it like that, you can understand Monty's concern over teleportation, and why it was and is so dangerous. One possible exception to this is the summoning key. Nikolai tells us in Tag the Totem that it is capable of opening and closing new worlds. We regularly see that portals can be created with it at ease, as we see in the Shadows of Evil, Zespo no Shima, and Gorod Krovi endings, with seemingly no 115 or other power source required, and the orange portals they create seem to reflect the same portals used by the Keepers and Shadows of Evil. The summoning key is manifesting their use of teleportation. The portals opened by the Apothecans in the Revelations intro cutscene also seem similar, however they range from a more blue to purple colour. These two match the colour schemes of each faction. The Apothecans and Keepers unlocked a method of teleportation greater than that of humanity. We'll discuss more about this later, but just keep in mind that it appears like the summoning key is a unique case that may not have an inherently negative effect on the universe. The next diagram we have depicts what is referred to as a world line, along with a world sheet and a world volume. Imagine your entire life plotted out as a timeline of events. Every single moment is written down, perhaps on a graph. This includes both the point in space you are at, as well as the point in time. If you could visualize this in day-to-day life, you would see an endless stream of copies of yourself both behind you, where you had been, and in front of you, where you were going to be. This is what Monty describes by us all being snowflakes on Gorod Krovi, and to stop thinking of it in simple terms, new and original. They are all literally the same streams of person. In effect, this is what a world line is, the current linear timeline for events for that universe. Specifically, a world line exists for a single, one-dimensional particle, and charts its path over time. The world sheet is that concept, but charting a 2D object's path over time. And the world volume is that, but charts a 3D object over time. Why is this relevant? Well, this is the exact process that occurs when Primus creates a fracture. In order to prevent a paradox in the timeline, history prior to that point changes to accommodate that change. For example, in the history of the world when we played Eisendrache, Ultimus Richtofen is dead, but history has been shifted to allow him to die at that moment, rather than being killed by time-traveling Primus Richtofen. As such, fractures are alternative universes completely. If we wanted to be pedantic, we're actually talking about different world volumes because we are talking about a 3D reality. But worldline is an easier and more commonly understood term in science fiction, so we'll keep using this phrase. In addition, as some viewers who might be knowledgeable on the maths behind this may know, plotting something over time means that we give it an extra dimension. Therefore, the world volume we are looking at is actually a graph in 4 dimensions, exactly like the Hypercube, which we will discuss soon, and exactly how the ether is and incomprehensible to us. We can be pretty sure that this diagram is discussing this as, if we look closely, we can see WL, WS, and WV annotated on each part of the diagram. But to make it even more clear, this same diagram actually appears in the Shadows of Evil scraps of paper as well, and is one of the many intentional similarities between the two. As you can see, this is a nearly identical diagram, aside from it being hand-drawn. The Shadows of Evil scrap is implied to be Richtofen's hastily sketched notes on where to go and what to do in his quest during Black Ops 3, learned from the Chronorium and his communications with Monty and Ludwig Maxis. I personally believe these notes were copied from Monty's blueprint, but you'll see why very soon. For now, just know that Richtofen made special note of the world lines that he would create through fracturing the original universe, as it is specifically annotated. Oddly enough, this is probably the most obscure part of the entire blueprint. However, given it also appears on the Shadows of Evil scraps, it's perhaps not something we can just disregard. After a serious amount of research, I believe I've actually figured out what was being communicated here, particularly as it appears on the KN-44 blueprint as well. First off, whilst doing some digging, I found this diagram that, to oversimplify, shows how space-time is relative depending on where you are and how much gravity is affecting you. This also looks mighty similar to the depiction of Samantha gaining ascendance and thus control of the ether itself when entering the MPD we see depicted on Classified. The depiction of Agatha, the ether, and the dark ether is also represented by layers. I believe the middle, ether, is oversimplified and these layers are meant to be all of the layers stacked in the ether between worlds. Or this could be depicting pre-fracturing before their world spilled into ours, when the Apothegons corrupted the universes with element 115. With the ether being shown as one world, like the empty earth theory, it's kind of like the core of all reality, the original universe. This looks quite a lot like the variant of the diagram on the Shadows of Evil scraps. Each layer depicted here is a point in time, an individual world layer like we discussed previously, with the entire diagram being a world volume. Okay, that's good, but it doesn't have a lot of relevance to us, so let's turn our eyes back to the scraps from the Giants. Clearly, in this diagram, the individual layers look almost identical to the world layers on the previous diagram, so we know that's the intent. We see 4 evenly spaced layers which depicts the flow of normal time, but then 2 layers appear to be interacting with one another, with energy coming off it. In fact, the artist seems to use the same rays from the sun in the solar system diagrams around these 2 layers, so we know whatever is going on, it's significant. That's when I did a bit more research and came upon what I believe to be the key to this. Where the world line is a single particle, the world sheet is a string. This event, I think, is depicting the string being bifurcated, or split into 2. If we remember that the world layer is a moment in history, this is literally depicting what happens when a fracture occurs. This diagram is literally a picture representation of how a fracture gets created. Extremely apt given it's in the Giants, where the first fracture occurs from Black Ops 3's narrative perspective. Probably one of the most mysterious and cryptic parts of the entire blueprint, but unlike the other diagrams, people have proposed several theories about what they are. First off, many people have been calling them constellations, including myself, since that just seemed to be the phrase everyone was running with. But upon researching, isn't actually right. These are diagrams showing solar systems. Some appear to possibly be that of Earth, and some appear totally different. We see these suns having planets around them with orbits a lot like those in our own solar system, but then with very irregular orbits. The irregular orbits are somewhat consistent with our solar system, especially when you consider comets and other celestial bodies, but still don't explain instances of two suns. Well, I think I have a possible answer. As noted previously, the Shadows of Evil scraps share a lot of similarities to this one, as if Richtofen copied this blueprint in a hurry whilst visiting the house in Agatha. Keeping that in mind, we can see another similarity. 4 solar system diagrams, one in each corner of the page. It's just that the ones on the Shadows of Evil scraps are a lot more basic. Additionally, on the Shadows of Evil scrap, we see 4 sets of coordinates, each one correlating to a map in Black Ops 3. The Giant in the bottom left hand corner, the Eisendrache in the top right, Zetsubo no Shima in the bottom right, and Gorod Krovi in the top left. Keeping that in mind, let's look at the solar system diagrams in the blueprint. As you can see on the chart, these are very clearly meant to represent each of the maps. We have the Giant, the Eisendrache, Zetsubo no Shima, and Gorod Krovi. Interestingly, the Giant and the Eisendraches are both the 2 were recently found by Sky's community on the church's monitors on the map, that point to a section of the map by the projector room that has one of the collection of John Dee decryption books, Alchemical Framework of the Luminiferous Ether. This could just be showing us how the fabric of reality works, and how it can be interpreted through the lens of alchemists like Dee and thus Monty. Wink. As opposed to a part of anything larger. Like stated, the Giant is where the original universe first fractures from the perspective of our journeying in Black Ops 3, which then leads to the overlapping of 2 circular patterns in the Eisendrache's case. Looking at this blueprint, we can see that Zetsubo no Shima and Gorod Krovi's would correspond to the 2 diagrams that show 2 solar systems intersecting. But what does that mean? There's obviously nothing relating to 2 overlapping solar systems in those maps. Or is there? Well, let's go back to what we discussed earlier. Worldlines and fractures. One issue that scientists constantly bring up with science fiction that deals with time travel is that, if you aim to travel back in time, you would be moving back in time, but not in space. You wouldn't be traveling backwards on your own world line. You'd only actually be changing the time that you were in. Let's put it another way. Because the entire solar system is constantly moving through space, actually accelerating outwards every second. If you just traveled backwards in time, you would end up in the vacuum of space, because you've not also moved through space. Scientists say that the only way to avoid this is with accurate teleportation alongside the time travel. In order to move through both time and space, you need to be able to calculate where exactly the Earth, and so the entire rest of the solar system, is going to be at the point in time you want to go to. How does this relate to the solar system diagrams then? Well, let's think about the maps. Richtofen arrives at a specific point in time at the original dimension, meaning he needs to know exactly where the Earth will be at that exact point in time to arrive in the teleporter to shoot the other Richtofen. We know Richtofen makes a pit stop at dimension 2210 to collect his younger self's soul, and then to the house between Shadows of Evil and the Giant. And assumedly, travelling from Agatha to another dimension is a bit simpler. From the Giant, now in the Deceptio fracture, they literally just walk to Griffin Castle using the Giant's robot. However, from there, they need to teleport to Zetsubo no Shima. The global coordinate written by Richtofen clearly led us to the island of Pompeii, where the map takes place. If we examine the blueprint solar system that would correspond to this map, we can see it works extremely well. We have 2 solar systems intersecting, both with orbits at different times. This is showing the 2 fractures, Deceptio and Predition, and the specific points in time they have to leave and arrive at, as Zetsubo no Shima takes place earlier than the Eisendrache in the timeline. This is different from the solar system for the Eisendrache, which has only 1 sun, as they didn't need to teleport from one point in space-time to another, so there was no need for the overlapping diagrams. We know things don't quite run like clockwork in the Eisendrache. with Dempsey briefly protesting in the ending cutscene and forcing Richtofen to restrain the characters and explain his agenda to them, which could possibly explain why they arrived at slightly the wrong place and time, ending up on the boat, captured by the Japanese Division 9. They didn't follow the instructions given specifically by the blueprint, or possibly Richtofen had the point in space-time slightly off in his own hastily drawn note. Now, the next and final solar system also depicts two suns, and this also makes sense as the characters likewise teleport through space and time from Pompeii to Stalingrad. However, this is obviously the most flawed and dangerous teleportation they do, as they end up in the sky, falling thousands of feet and almost dying as a result.
This was part of the plan, Richtofen! Not exactly!
We can make a good guess why this is, because they absolutely didn't leave at the correct time, immediately when Takeo dies. Instead, they visit Alcatraz, collecting the blood, and then teleport back to Zetsubo-no-Shima, only then moving onto Gorod Krovi. This would 100% throw off the positions of the Earth in the two fractures, causing the messed up teleport. And we've seen this literally happen in the Blood of the Dead intro cutscene, where they spawn in slightly the wrong place in the dark. Richtofen remarks that the dimensions are slightly off in this broken cycle that they were unaware of until moments later when Richtofen reads the Chronorium again.
Was stumbling around in total darkness part of plan?
They should be closer to the lab. No matter. This way, if you please.
What is the meaning of this? The pages have changed. They... Our blood! Mine blood! You cannot possibly expect me to let this happen! You son of a bitch!
Onto the elephant in the room. The Hypercubes, Tesseracts, 4D cubes, or whatever you want to call them. We actually have not one, but three shown on here. And so we'll start with the first two. Now, first off, some people might have not even realized that the image of the 8 connected cubes was even a Hypercube. But it is, or rather, it is the net of one. If you take a cube that's a 3D shape, you can construct it out of 6 2D squares, folded up together. In fact, you probably did this in an early grade in school. Similarly though, we can do the same thing for a 4D shape using 3D shapes. While we can't actually perceive a 4D shape, as we can only see 3 dimensions, we know using mathematics that if you can make a 3D shape with 2D shapes, you can make a 4D shape using 3D shapes. You could keep going, making 5D with 4D, etc. But we really don't have time for that, and at this point my brain is already starting to melt. But in essence, these 8 cubes stuck together, if folded inwards, create the iconic Hypercube shape. Of course, with all of our discussions about Worldlines and the 4th dimension, the reason to include a Tesseract should be pretty clear. It's an object depicted as moving through an additional 4th dimension, with that 4th dimension being time. Really then, you can think of the Hypercube as the representation of any object moving through time, even a person. Now, onto what you've been waiting for, the KN-44, the Hypercube, and my new discovery. I've been quite open about the fact that I think the KN-44 inside the Hypercube and summoning key is just an explanation for the war buys, and I'm even more convinced of this now. Whether or not you think the KN-44 is the key to the impossible Easter egg, that's up to you, and this video doesn't necessarily devalue that in any way. That being said, here's how this explains it. We already mentioned that the summoning key is special, in that it seemingly allows for the opening of wormholes, for worlds to be bridged or closed off from one another, without breaking the universe. In Tag the Totem, we actually see the universe emerge from within the summoning key itself. And so, it's not stretched to imagine that due to its immense power, the summoning key effectively contains existence within itself. Or at least, because it was used in the creation of all things, has the power to manipulate the universe without consequence. What then is the Hypercube within? Well, whilst researching this video, I came across something which instantly set alarm bells off in my head. A science fiction story that was linked on the Wikipedia page for the Hypercube called "And He Built a Crooked House." Now those of you who played Classified and Cold War will immediately remember this as the nursery rhyme Samantha recites that was clearly referring to Monty and the house.
Was a crooked man, and he walked a crooked mile. He found crooked sixpence upon a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat, which caught a crooked mouse. And they all lived together in a little crooked house.
He was a crooked man, and he went a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence against a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat, which caught a crooked mouse, and they all lived together in a little crooked house. There was a woman that I met. Her gait was far from crooked. She told me never to lose faith, in spite of how I looked. She told me that I was not worthless. The German accent threw me off, but her words inspired me nonetheless. We will fix this crooked house.
And I now think that speculation is truer than ever. Andy Built a Crooked House, which is named after the nursery rhyme, is a science fiction story about a genius architect who decides to make a wonderful new type of house that takes up less space than any before but is still spacious on the inside by building a house in the shape of a hypercube net, like the one we see on the diagram. Essentially, it's bigger on the inside for those of you familiar with the TARDIS from Doctor Who. At night, there is an earthquake, and in the morning, the architect wakes up and is horrified and amazed to find that the quake has somehow folded the house into an actual hypercube. As a result, the space is incredibly strange, with windows leading to other rooms and stairs forming closed loops. The connections to the Ether storyline here are alarmingly clear, and it's really odd that no one has ever found this before. But I can't find anyone having brought it up in the past, at least as far as I'm aware. Regardless, this is so clearly a parallel to Monty and Agatha. We learn in Tags of Totem that ethereal energy seeps out from the space between all atoms. Now we have this direct connection to Agatha and the Hypercube. In the Wisps on Grodkrovi, Monty refers to Agatha as the world within the world. Now, as mentioned earlier, in the older days of the storyline, this made a lot of sense. We thought Agatha was literally within the Earth, as has been theorized as this is not a zombie-specific concept, and that seems to be the original idea Treyarch were beckoning. But as we moved narratively away from that, the idea that this was within the world made less sense. But it seems more just like any other dimension, which was why Monty calling it this by the time of Grodkrovi seemed so odd. Now, with the allusion to this story about the house that folds in on itself and exists in the fourth dimension, it makes total sense. Agatha technically exists within the world as it exists within the fourth dimension. We literally can't perceive it, but through the summoning key, which is connected to it and to all things, we can access it. Similarly, all the warbys act as portals, just like the summoning key, bridging space and time in order to bring through weapons from different points in time and space, without necessarily damaging the fabric of the universe. And essentially, the Hypercube is just representing how Monty can manifest the warbys through time and space, from all different eras, displacing them. Furthermore, if the summoning key has the ability to bridge dimensions, as well as collect souls, which who knows how many are even in there, then it too undoubtedly is bigger on the inside. Much like the Crooked House, the MPD probably is too, allowing people to gain control over the ether in a similar way to the summoning key, unlocking the ability to control the four-dimensional realm. The difference being, in using the Apothegms method, it breaks and corrupts the universes and its inhabitants, as it's a dangerous form of magic, deemed forbidden by the Keepers, which is why the Apothicons were banished. Whereas the Keepers method is cleaner and the original method from which the universe even initially spawned when they used the key to create all dimensions, giving them a unique mix of life, much like the new universe created for the Dark Ether saga. It, at the very least, contains all the essence and materials needed to create universes and life within, if not the very universe itself. But what do you guys think? Do you think the theories and explanations here actually make sense, or do you have an altogether different conclusion? Do you have any further ideas that have stemmed from the setup of this video? Because honestly, I have a lot more ideas, but this video is already so long. Maybe they'll be saved for another day. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts in the comments on this one, as we can get an interesting debate going that's not even necessarily connected to the impossible Easter egg, and more story and lore related as to how the zombies universe actually functions, which definitely could still be related to this, but I think maybe it's blinded us to some of the other really cool stuff that this piece of intel has been trying to communicate to us for years. With that said, I once again want to urge all of you to check out the John D. Book Cipher Solve on the Eisendrache. Now, as you will learn in that video, it's not necessarily a cipher, but regardless, we got the hidden message. And it turns out my theories about the impossible Easter egg were correct, and I think that really is the impossible Easter egg. The KN-44 could very well be connected to some sort of other Easter egg or something further. The developers, yes, have outright said that they kept using the KN-44 as a reference, as an insider joke between the developers because we, the community, were latching onto it so much so.
But now I feel like I'm absolutely obligated to. Here's that conversation. Hi. Me and one of my hunting buddies are working hard behind the scenes to try and help solve the mysteries around the KN-44 blueprint on the Giant. We never found any meaning to this image of the KN-44 assault rifle that can be assembled from bits of scrap paper on the Giant. The KN-44 also appears in many maps hidden throughout the Easter egg main quests. Is there any significance to this image or Easter egg cipher related to the KN-44 in general? The developer responded with some personal stuff, so I blurted out, but they responded saying, but I don't think there was any real meaning behind it. More of a gag because people latched onto it.
That doesn't mean they didn't retroactively make it a part of something larger beyond then. But I don't think it's a part of the impossible Easter egg. It might be part of something else, but it's abundantly clear now we've gotten the big one out of the way, despite what some may say. The evidence is slated against them. But anyways, thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe if you're not for the latest and greatest Call of Duty news and information. So anyways, thank you for watching, and bye.